Hi, I'm Amanda Jane Woodall and welcome to my fashion school. So today I'm going to be returning to my British Style Icon series, but I'm not going to be focusing on somebody who has influenced style. I'm going to look at one of the greatest British fashion designers of all time. Described as the rebel king of fashion, today we're going to be talking about Lee Alexander McQueen. Early years. On the 17th of March 1969, Lee McQueen was born in Stratford, East London. An area known for its hard working class people, but also it was plagued by poverty and drug misuse. And I mention this because McQueen said that this environment had influenced his design aesthetic. He was the youngest of 6 children, and his mum was a teacher and his dad was a London taxi driver. He had modest roots, sharing a room with his siblings, and at school he struggled to concentrate, being a bit of a chatterbox. He spent his childhood drawing clothes and excelled at art, and he enjoyed low-level French, although he never became fluent. As there was a family connection to tailoring, after school, his mother encouraged him to work as an apprentice at an exclusive tailor's on Savile Row. This work was highly skilled and precise, and McQueen found it a little bit boring sewing the same kind of thing every day, so he went in search of a more creative workspace. He turned up unannounced at Central St Martin's, which is one of the best fashion schools in Britain. He took along his drawings and his tailoring work and asked them to give him a job. But the thing is, you had to have a long-standing reputation to work at the school, and McQueen was still young, so they offered him a place on the master's course instead. Career. He had a strong start to his fashion design career, as eccentric fashion journalist Isabella Blow became obsessed with his graduate collection and she wanted to purchase it. This industry approval gave him some initial credibility, and he set up a very small design studio with a group of very talented artists and began making clothes for the runway. The group were seen as quite rough around the edges for a fashion house, and their influences were dark and gritty, like prostitution and underground culture. And McQueen really loved to play up his British hooligan reputation because he felt like this made him stand out amongst his fashion peers. Although, in reality, he was a sensitive man. He'd struggled to feel accepted because of his homosexuality, and he loved his family and his tight-knit group of weird and fashionable friends. His early fashion shows dealt with subjects such as nihilism and domestic violence. He also looked into historical figures such as Joan of Arc and historical battles between the English and the Scottish. He used the trauma of these events to make clothing that looked torn and bloodied, but also very tailored and well made. The fashion media did not immediately warm to McQueen's collections. They felt like they were too violent and had tones of misogyny and depravity. McQueen explained that the clothing and its imagery were actually just metaphors. He had no hatred of women, and his work was talking about society and the fashion industry. A particular moment of controversy came as McQueen's work gained acclaim in the industry because he refined his style so the work was emotionally complex but actually saleable. La Poupée Spring Summer 1997 showed McQueen's love for collaboration and the arts. He asked his jeweller to make cages for the body that would restrict the model's movements, and one of these cages became influenced when it was placed on model Deborah Shaw. She was an African American model, and the press thought there were connotations of slavery. However, McQueen had previously had a conversation with the model about his ideas, and he told her that the cage was actually about fascism within the fashion industry. Dior had recently acquired the talent of John Galliano, and Givenchy wanted a new face that was going to sell their product to new, young, rich clients. McQueen moved to France to become the CEO of Givenchy, and for the first time he had unlimited resources and the best quality materials to make his haute couture collection. He was only 27 years old, and this was a huge responsibility to revive a classical brand that was very different from his own signature style. He taught the atelier staff to be less precise about their tailoring, as he liked to shred and cut fabric very intuitively. His collection was not seen as elegant enough for French fashion, and it wasn't meeting the exacting standards of that industry. So in his second collection, he decided to revisit the house codes, and he reinvented them in a fun way that would still suit the original clientele. In 2001, his talent was brought back by the house of Gucci. McQueen had become very disillusioned with the glamour of French fashion and wanted to look into his own interests into nature, and Gucci allowed him to do this. The shows that followed are considered some of his greatest works, starting with Voss in Spring/Summer 2001. This show was an act of freedom for McQueen, as he shocked and horrified the audience with his insane asylum setting and animalistic creations. The audience were left to stare into a mirror for 2 hours before the show, and then when it started, very mentally ill looking models walked around the runway disorientated because they were looking into one-way glass, so they couldn't see the audience. The finale saw a glass box come crashing down, revealing a model who was posed like the photo sanitarium. McQueen had successfully disgusted and terrified his audience into thinking about inner beauty. His career became an exhausting process, as he had to put out 30 collections in 3 years, and the press were constantly bloodthirsty for a new story. He used illegal substances to cope with the workload, and this led him to have dark thoughts and enter into depression. His last collection, Plato's Atlantis, was a serene depiction of otherworldly creatures. In his imagination, a new reptilian future had arisen from the result of environmental damage. He took his own life on the 11th of February 2010, 9 days after losing his mother. And fashion lost an amazing creative rebel, and the mourning is still felt to this day. Legacy. The McQueen fashion house was taken over by Sarah Burton, who makes beautiful and well-made clothing in respect of her late friend. But Lee McQueen's spirit lives on in the fashion industry, encouraging people to use their life experiences to the fullest. Design is now taught in a different way, encouraging students to think about concepts and not just their ability to sew. And fashion students are encouraged to push the boundaries and not stick within the protocols of classical fashion design. His legacy is far-reaching and his popularity is ever increasing as new people learn about this British legend. And his work was immortalised in the exhibition Savage Beauty, which means that the work is preserved to share with future generations. So, we have come to the end of this video, but I will see you again in my follow-up video where I'm going to take you to a fashion event. Oh yes, I am!